Sense making is fundamentally a human process through which individuals comprehend the unfamiliar, the confounding circumstances that challenge the established expectations. And these often disrupt what is considered to be normal in a particular context, leading people to reassess and to reorganize their understanding of that context. When humans organize themselves socially or professionally, they inherently render themselves vulnerable to the different events that are outside their control, but nonetheless affect them. And this vulnerability stems from the unpredictability of the future and the possibility of unforeseen circumstances that disrupt the established structures. It is crucial to recognize that communication is the central mechanism people use to organize when disaster strikes, when a crisis is presented. These circumstances oftentimes originate from infrastructures that were impartial at the outset of them. People don't intend to cause harm typically. Rather, evolving conditions can reshape the frameworks into something that is beneficial for them or detrimental. So once people understand their roles and objectives in their jobs, they tend to go on autopilot. Familiarity leads to efficiency, especially in roles that involve fluctuating environments, and routine work oftentimes requires less effort. And having a foundational constant is comforting in ever-changing circumstances that we find ourselves in. However, when this routine is disrupted by the external factors, and it generates uncertainty and anxiety, an interpretive process is triggered. And this process pushes individuals to reassess their social environment, and it leads them to moments of anxiety and to uncertainty. So anxiety is the emotional response to that, and uncertainty is the cognitive response to that. During such times, people feel stuck. They feel unable to grasp or even to respond competently to new or peculiar situations. And action becomes difficult until understanding is developed of the situation. And this is really at the heart of sense making. The journey from confusion to clarity. When confronted with what Mike and other sense-making scholars call equivocality, or the presence of multiple conflicting interpretations, individuals are often prompted to ask, what is the story here, and what should I do next? Sense-making is also retrospective. It involves making sense of events after they've occurred. So this backward-looking approach allows for organizations to identify discrepancies between what was expected and what actually transpired. So organizations that commit to renewal after a crisis demonstrate real potential for growth. And that is what we're going to get into for the remainder of the semester, and it will be relevant in the final project. With time, effort, and seriousness allow the organization to emerge stronger, more trustworthy, and more resilient than it was before. And an example of this, the BP oil spill in 2010 that occurred near the Gulf, stakeholders conducted a retrospective analysis of safety protocol failures that led to the disaster. And in other words, they were able to make sense of what had occurred after the fact. That's the first principle. The second principle is known as enactment. And here the environment doesn't merely exist as a backdrop. It is shaped by our actions. It is shaped by the actions of those with agency to make decisions and those who are enacting decisions. Think of an organization like a garden. It's full of potential beauty, vibrant colors. The gardener needs to engage with it actively, though. Pruning, weeding, fertilizing, and these actions represent the human decision and the way the human decisions not only respond to the state of the environment, but also transform it. So this exemplifies how enactment plays a role in sense making. Our behaviors create the realities that we then interpret. The third aspect of sense making is that it involves extracting cues from inundating array of possible information sources and data sources. With too many signals, too much ambiguity, individuals narrow their focus to certain indicators that help them to interpret their surroundings. So returning to the garden metaphor here, a gardener might notice the leaves are not growing as they had imagined that they would, or blooming flowers in one part of the garden gives us cues about the sunlight or the water levels or even the pest issues that exist in the garden. In organizational settings, decision makers extract technical details quickly to make informed decisions amid chaos of a crisis. The fourth component is that sense making is driven by plausibility, but not necessarily accuracy. Plausibility is the idea that we have in our minds what is perceived by the actors, by the agents, to be the most reasonable explanation, but that doesn't mean that it's entirely correct. For example, In the BP case study, it was initially estimated that oil spill flow occurred at 10,000 barrels per day. An assessment, this was considered to be the most plausible. However, later on, this was corrected because it was not accurate. It was around 60,000 barrels a day. The initial underestimation, while plausible, shaped the response and the public perception in vital ways. And this shows how plausible but inaccurate interpretations can significantly influence the outcomes during a crisis situation. Number 5, sense making is an ongoing process. It has no clear beginning or end. It's constantly occurring and unfolding, sometimes subtly in the background, other times more visibly when routines are disrupted. When something unexpected occurs, like a delayed flight or unexplained traffic, our sense-making efforts intensify. We focus more deliberately on interpreting what is happening in order to regain a sense of control or continue with whatever our objective is in the situation. Number 6, sense making is a social activity. We rarely make sense of complex situations in isolation, especially within organizations. We consult others, be it executives, team members, stakeholders, to build a shared understanding of what is happening. And that collaborative aspect is visible in a lot of organizational settings. For example, when executives are convened in meetings and they collectively decide on how to respond to a crisis situation, their interactions are shaped and their interpretations are shaped and influenced by their decisions. Okay. Number 7 is that sense making is a process of identification. When people assign meaning to a situation, they also affirm or redefine who they are, individually or collectively. For BP, the oil spill not only represented an environmental disaster, but it also triggered a crisis of their identity as an organization. As a company that branded itself as environmentally responsible, BP had to reconcile its public image with its operational failures. And that contrast between these identities damaged its credibility and public trust and its trust with stakeholders. And there are a lot of the ways that identification plays out between executives and team members and associates, between the public relations and the stakeholders, between the decision makers and those that have to enact the decisions. Our decisions are shaped by a number of different factors. It could be loyalty to our firm. It could be the sense of our professional identity, but that identification drives behavior and our response to a crisis. Okay. So an example of this could be, let's think about fast food. Okay, familiar example, fast food. And we'll look at Chipotle, another familiar example. Chipotle, during the pandemic and post-pandemic periods, 2020s, okay, Chipotle made some bold and strategic pivots that offers kind of a robust sense-making case study, particularly for how a chain can navigate ambiguity and evolve its identification during and after a public crisis. So the retrospective aspect of it is that in 2020, Chipotle basically realized that its pre-pandemic investments in certain infrastructures had positioned it well to offer online mobile ordering as well as takeout. That's a reflection that they were able to engage in, helped them to understand what could work and identifying gaps in terms of needing faster throughput at pickup, for example. The second thing is enactment. Enactment at Chipotle occurred when they actively reshaped their operating environment by launching Chipotle lanes, which were drive-through lanes dedicated solely to mobile orders. Unlike the traditional drive-thrus, these require customers to order ahead through the app. This wasn't just adaptation, though. It created a consumer behavior that blended digital ordering with the physical pickup aspect of it. So Chipotle's actions materially changed the fast casual landscape that they were operating in. Next, remember extracted cues. Rather than being overwhelmed by fluctuating customer data or supply chain shortages, or even the public health crisis, they focused on order volume through the app. They focused on the hesitancy about indoor dining at the time and staff feedback about workflow challenges, as well as the safety of their workplace. And these extracted cues help to streamline their pandemic and post-pandemic strategy. What we see post-pandemic, and this is the fifth component of sense making, is that Chipotle's transformation wasn't just a one-time adjustment. They continue to refine a lot of their layout strategy as a result of this crisis situation. And in a way that is an example of how sense making is an ongoing process. It's also a social activity with everyone from the kitchen staff to marketing teams contributing to this to some extent, right? They were able to figure out how to meet the customer needs of the workflow. And then finally, they were able to become a more forward thinking organization because they offered a lot of these contactless options to consumers at the time. So in summary, sense making is a well established framework. It explains how organizations and individuals interpret and respond to complex and ambiguous events. And by applying this lens to case studies and to real world examples, we gain insight into how communication and decision-making processes unfold during moments of uncertainty. When you do your final project, you'll choose a case study to explore using the sense-making framework, and you'll uncover a lot of lessons about how meaning shapes action and how action in terms reshapes the meaning as a cycle and process.